Hi, this is Chris Hoy. Thank you for joining me on Create with Chris. I've always wondered if you could create the look of beautiful watercolor using acrylic paints. So today I'm going to show you, yes, you can. As we paint this fun St. Patrick's Day door hanger, I'll share my tips and tricks to achieve that beautiful look of watercolor. So grab your brushes and let's get started. The surface I'm using is an MDF surface, and I always seal with a multi-purpose sealer. I'm using my 1.5" short wash. It's a very soft bristle base coat, and I'm applying a nice even thin layer of multi-purpose sealer, starting in the middle and brushing it toward the outside. It just helps keep the outer edges clean. Want to make sure it's nice and smooth and even. Once I finish, I'll give it a quick dry and a light sand. That will ensure the paint's going to stick well, it's going to be kinder to my brushes, and I'll have a much more even result when it's finished. I've loaded my 3/4 inch oval wash with Snow White, and I'm again starting more in the middle and brushing toward the outer edge. I wanted to get the look of watercolor, and to achieve this I need to have a bright background because I know that the base coat is going to, or the actual paint is going to be very thin, so whatever is the base coat is going to be a very strong element in how the end product's going to look. So I am applying the paint. It's not solid and heavy. It's very loose. I do have a fair bit of moisture in my brush so I can work my paint, and I just want to smooth it out to eliminate any strong brush strokes. And I did not go back and put a second coat. I just wanted a brighter background. I've put some colors on my palette: Spa Blue, Jadeite Glass, Green Tree, and Mystic Teal. This is such a fun way to apply a background. It's very easy, light paint, and I had to wipe my brush off because I had too much paint. Mystic Teal is a very, very strong color. It doesn't take much. A little bit of tint of these darker, stronger, more saturated colors goes a long, long way. Now I did grab my Distress Mister and lightly sprayed the surface to keep that paint movable. I started with the Spa Blue, added a little Mystic Teal. Now I'm going in with Jadeite Glass. I wanted it to be a little bit brighter towards the top, and that's where the two holes are. There is no wrong way to meld these colors together. I just kind of think about it and apply a little bit and look at it for a short time. I can use that Spa Blue to soften those colors, but mostly I'm using water on my brush. Now, if water doesn't last long enough, there's a fast dry glaze medium that can be used, but you can see my surface is glistening. That paint needs to be movable. This will require a couple coats, so this first coat is just pretty much for placement. Again, I mist it with water. I like the Distress Sprayer because it's just a fine mist of water. It's no heavy drips. Not anywhere in this background do I have a strong application of paint. Very, very thin. Let the edges feather out. It's much easier to blend together if there's not a strong area of color. And it looks okay. I'm trying to eliminate a lot of the brush strokes. I'm using more not the chisel edge, but the side of the tip to blend those colors together. I let it dry well, and then I'm repeating the same process. Once I have that base layer on, it's much easier to go back and know where I need to add colors. Again, this is just a hint of paint and a lot of moisture. And I dip my brush in water often. When I go off screen, that's where my water pail is, so that's where I pick up my water. And I just blend it out, soften it. It's still, the entire plaque is very loose. It has a lot of moisture in it, so I can really work that paint. Hints of color, and even if needed, you could put 3 layers of paint on. So it's just a very soft, slow, I work quickly, but it's a slow, controlled brush stroke to blend those together so that they just shift from one color to another very, very softly. I love the way this looks. It has a very ethereal glow to it, super easy to control. Once it does start to tack up, though, please remember you need to back off, let it dry, and then go in and add another layer. Because the paint is so thin and so light, layers can be added super easy without any problems at all. And again, there's no right or wrong way. You just want it to shift from one color to another. Any combination of colors can be used. Because I thought it just needed a little more something, I wanted to splatter it with Snow White. Using the splatter brush, it just is super easy to control. Always, always, always test it on your palette before you splatter it onto your surface. If you let the surface dry completely and you make a mistake, it's a little bit easier to wipe it off and clean it up. I did add a little bit of Mystic Teal and the green tree splatters, so it didn't look like snow. I just wanted it to look more like design as opposed to snow. After I splattered it, I misted it again with the Distress Mister. That just helps to diffuse those spots, speckles, so that they're just a little bit softer. When working with layers, thin, and this is 1/8 inch thick on the layer, I'm using a triangle cosmetic sponge. Started out, I have a little bit of the jadeite glass and the spa blue, kind of picked a little bit of both up on the bottom of my sponge. The sponge is very flat and dense on the bottom. I have a super light touch. If I press hard, it's going to squish down the sides. This is such a great tool and a great trick to apply paint quickly, evenly, and keep those side edges clean. And I'm just tapping it on lightly. And as it dries, it may shrink up a little bit, but I'm putting a lot of layers over top. This is the same concept as the background. I want a bright base beneath the shamrocks so that when I put those thin layers of paint on, it's going to glow. It's not going to be a solid, heavy, flat color. And you can see there's kind of a two-tone on this. I really wanted to play around with this and just have fun with it and not stress out about being too perfect. Did let it dry completely, picked up just a touch of green tree on the toe of my 1/2 inch angle, and I'm just floating it. I really haven't decided where I want. I know the center is going to be a little bit darker, but I thought it would be more fun. You know how watercolors kind of blend out or puddle out and you get that soft mix of colors, and I wanted to try to replicate that. So it's super, super thin paint, and I'm going from light to dark so that I can control the layers. Pick a hint of that Mystic Teal is so strong. Kind of played around with the first couple before I went into did all the rest of them. See how that just that hint of color kind of blends in with that green tree. And not only do I get that touch of that Mystic Teal, but as it blends, it creates a third color, which is absolutely stunning. I love the way these work together. So I don't know if you can see or not, but the paint really glistens. It's almost, I would say, 80% paint or water and just a hint of color. And it makes it super easy to move it around, to add that little hint of another color, and they just softly kind of, I don't want to say run together, but they meld together beautifully. And it's super easy, just little tiny touches of paint. That was a little bit strong, but what I'll do is I've got it on my brush, clean my brush off, and then just wipe some of that, move some of that paint around. Pick up a little green tree and let that blend together. I wanted every shamrock to be different, very artsy and very interesting. If they're all the same, I think you lose that focal point, that little bit of interest. But look how nicely those blend. Just a hint of paint. My motto, a little bit of paint makes a big difference. I was thinking about watercolors and how they softly blend, and I thought, I think we can create that very easily. So the secret is a lot of moisture, if not water. Go with the fast dry glaze medium. Just keeps that open time a little bit longer. This is New Leaf, and I thought it would be fun to add this. It's really a strong, it's a little bit deeper, but it's a strong, more of a yellow green than the blue green. Love the contrast. Just brings more color, especially when using a monochromatic theme for color. Adding this little pop of, I always say, the unexpected really ramps it up a notch or two. Look how that brings that color down in there. Every leaf I've added color, maybe in a little bit different place. Like I said, just to keep it a little more interesting, but already they really start to glow. I love how that yellow green, that New Leaf, really brings a whole different look. And it does absolutely look like watercolor. And I think it's because we're building on that brighter base, adding just those little light floats of color over top, letting it come together all by itself. And probably in real time, I kind of sped through a little bit of this just because of the time constraints. But this, I'm adding just a little bit of Kelly green on here, bring a stronger color in. But in actuality, it probably took about an hour and a half to paint this. You think about it, it's not a lot of heavy painting, just little dabs of color. And it does help to let it dry before the next color is added, because as it dries, it may shift a little bit deeper or stronger, may need a second coat, may not have enough. So just adding little bits on there, and by the time I start with one shamrock and work all the way around the circle, the first shamrock is really close to being dry. So I didn't have to use my dryer often at all. Now I know I did want the stems a little bit darker. My background that we just created is very pastel and leans more to the light side. So I knew I wanted these shamrocks to be just a little bit stronger. So even though I'm using the same colors, here I'm bumping down to Hauser dark green, and I see that little tiny bit of, I picked up on my brush, and I did bump down to 1/4 inch awesome angle just so I had a little more control on that. This is such a saturated, strong color. It just takes a teeny tip on the toe of the brush, and that's more than plenty to add quite a bit of color to those leaves. But look what a difference that little hint of that dark Hauser green adds to that. It just makes it very rich. And again, you can see from the shine of the camera how much moisture is on my brush. I was thinking I should add little veins in it, but I decided to do that a little bit later on. This is so much fun because it's so easy to manipulate and change the whole look with just maybe one hint of color, and the whole shamrock's going to take on a whole different look. I did know I wanted the centers of the shamrock to be just a little bit darker so that it looks like the tips come forward just a touch. And I didn't shade. Normally I say shade on the left or shade on the right, highlight on the left or the right. This one I just went for design and probably more so impact than artistically correct, I guess, if you go by art rules. I did pick up my liner, and to add some veins on it, I always feel like when doing a very loose project, if something is intricate is added, it really ramps it up. So I'm using my 20-aught Epic script liner. It's a brand new brush. It is absolutely amazing. And Hauser dark green to paint the veins. And I painted veins on all of them. But the problem I ran into as I painted these is that in the darker areas of the shamrock, the veins kind of disappeared because they blended in with the shading. So after I got all of the veins added in, I decided to go back with a little bit of spa blue just to brighten those veins up. And not only did it brighten them up, but it also added just a little bit more dimension on that. And I love the way it turned out. And this is the spa blue. So if you're enjoying this video, let me know what you think. I had so much fun. I hope you give it a try because this is such a unique technique. And it's almost like a painting vacation. I really enjoyed doing it because it came together so quickly and it looks so beautiful. And I think you can use these techniques on just about anything to keep it a little more light and loose, and it's just absolutely beautiful. And you can see what a difference the spa blue makes. It just brings a little brightness into those leaves. And I do thin this down a good bit with water so that it flows on well. My Epic script liner is a little bit longer than a liner, shorter than a script. So I have a longer stroke. I don't have to load as often. I decided that the border around the outer edge needed to be very dark to give a nice contrast between the background and this layer. And again, I'm using that cosmetic sponge. Look how beautifully that covers. Very, very light touch. If it's not going on well, add a little water to it or take your mister and kind of mist your palette, and that will loosen up the paint and make it much easier to apply. I didn't know if it was too dark or not, so I picked a little bit of, this is holly green, and I picked a little bit of the new leaf. And I didn't blend it, I just picked a little bit of that up on the sponge. Gave it almost a two-tone effect. It looked kind of marbled. It was really pretty. I did blend it in so it wasn't splotches of color. But it's such a great way to apply the paint very easily. And you can see there's very little. I'm not pressing hard, so there's very little on the paper towel. And I think probably most of it is past the edge. When I'm finished, I don't have any paint that runs down. Make sure you keep your paint fresh, because if you have to, if your paint's dry, you're going to press harder, and that's when you're going to run into problems. And it's just, it saves a lot of time if you don't have to go back and touch up the side edge. You very well could paint the side edges completely all green, which would be very nice as well. And that easy to put that on there. After I put this on and looked at it, I thought it needed to have just a little more, you know, that one more thing. So I'm picking up a little bit of Hauser dark green, kind of shading it along the outer edge. And this is a very loose watery shade, and it just kind of anchors that outside edge and helps frame it in just a little bit more. And it's not a heavy float of paint. I can still see all those colors. I would say it's a very translucent float, and it just takes a hint of paint. We always put too much on our palette, but I try to always hone back a little bit and not be wasteful. Mostly water, toe of my brush just scooting it around the outer edge. And I kind of do just a little choppy float. This is very dark. You wouldn't think it'd make a difference, but it truly does make a difference. I thought the shamrocks needed a little bit of sparkle, so I splattered white paint on them Took my paper towel to cover up the border because I didn't want to get splatters on the border. And this splatter brush is very controllable. It's not messy. I don't have to worry about my fingers getting paint on them. It's very easy to hone in on the areas I want the paint to be. But I got a little careless here. I didn't put my paper towel on, and I got some on the outer border. And this is what we call a happy accident, because after I saw that little bit on the border, I thought I can touch it up, not a big deal. But I really liked it, and it just helped to brighten up the border. You know, sometimes it's that little thing that you do that makes a big difference, and definitely this really helped brighten that border up. Kind of the continuity of the splatters in the background and the border. It's always those little touches that everybody looks at that looks really nice. And sometimes those are the easiest things to do. Happy St. Patrick's Day lettering. I'm telling you what, if you had to paint this with a brush, you'd go crazy. This is definitely a flat cosmetic sponge technique. Look how easily I can cover that. Now, when it dries, and I did want this to be solid, when it dries, paint will tighten up. And a lot of times the result is that you'll see a little bit of open spaces. You think you've got it covered well. When it dries, you see places you think you missed. Well, the paint is just shrinking a little bit as it dries. So I did the first coat with the sponge, let it dry really well, and then I went back and added a second coat. Now I know I wanted it to have more than just one color, so I'm using the cosmetic sponge to do an ombre effect. So I've loaded it with the Hauser dark green, and I'm just kind of tapping it on the bottom third of the letters. I'm using one of my painter tools to kind of mask it out, but this is perfect for blending the ombre letters. And I've just lightly tap it on the bottom and walk it up the letter very lightly. And I didn't want to get it on the tops of the lower level of letters, so that's why I masked that off. And on day, I didn't need to use the mask. I decided I want the top bit of the letters to be brighter, so I loaded the sponge with New Leaf, and I'm just tapping it on. Love the way that looked. I had to wipe my sponge off a little bit, and then I'm walking it down where the two meet and just blending it together. Absolutely beautiful. What a perfect way to add intricate look to the lettering. It looks so much like it has this beautiful ombre effect. I found out because of the straight edges of the sponge, I really didn't need that painter's tool to mask it off. Sometimes I'm a little bit sloppy, messy, careless, whatever. But look what a difference that brightness on the tops of the letters. Not only does it create interest on the letters, but it helps to break them up so they don't look like one solid mass of letters. And they blend together. Oh, it's just absolutely beautiful. And lay it on there. How perfect. Now the only thing I need to do, there's a little comma stroke on the tip of the one shamrock, and if you're doing this piece you need to look for that because that needs to be right there. I waited until the end when the letters were finished to paint that in because I wanted it to match, and I had no clue when I was doing my shamrocks what I was going to do to the letters. So I painted it the holly green, and then I just went back and darkened the bottom with Hauser and lightened the top. I thought the letters need a little more character, so I'm using a bigger stylus and starting at the top of the thick part of each letter and dotting down. And as I go down, each dot becomes smaller. And it just really adds a delicate touch to those letters. And I did that on the thicker part of all of the script letters. And that was all I was intending to do. But after I got it finished, I was looking at it and I thought it needed something else. So I kind of played around with a dip dot. I went to a smaller stylus. I put a bigger dip dot in the center and then walked it down smaller on each side of that center dot. Love the way that looked, so I did that on all the letters. I think it's just absolutely looking great. That watercolor effect is stunning. I love it. So I have a question. I want your opinion. I had 3 little leprechauns I was going to paint on here and sprinkle some gold coins falling down. So let me know if you think this needed the little leprechauns kind of doing a little jig in the background. I thought it would be kind of fun to have a little bit of leprechaun shenanigans going on. So let me know what you think about that. I varnished it with an ultra matte varnish and glued it together with a tacky glue. I love how it turned out, and I hope you learned a few new tips and tricks to create a stunning watercolor effect. Thank you again for joining me today. Let me know if you think I should add leprechaun shenanigans on this. Maybe I'll do that in another video. Everything I used is listed in the links below. Be sure to check that out. Don't forget to like, subscribe, ring the bell. That way you won't miss out on future upcoming videos. I look forward to our next painting adventure together. And remember, a little bit of paint makes a big difference.